كفاني علم ربي من سؤالي واختياري.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم، والصلاة والسلام على خير المرسلين محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. We left off last week with وَلَمْ يُحْكَمْ بِكُفْرِهِ لِأَنَّهُ مَعْذُورٌ. So then we're starting today with this part. وَإِنْ لَمْ يَكُنْ مِمَّنْ يَجْهَلُ ذَلِكَ كَنَاشِعٍ مِنَ الْمُسْلِمِينَ في الأمصار والقرى لم يؤذر ولم يقبل منه ادعاء الجهل وحكم بكفره، لأن أدلة الوجوب ظاهرات في كتاب والسنة، ومسلمون يفعلونها على الدوام، فلا يخفى وجوبها على من هذا حاله، فلا يجحدها إلا تكذيبا لله تعالى ولرسوله وإجماع الأمة، وهذا يصير مرتدى عن الإسلام، وحكمه حكم سائر المرتدين في الاستتابة والقتل، ولا أعلم في هذا الخلافة. وإن تراكها لمرض أو أجز أو أركانها وشروطها قيل له إن ذلك لا يسقط الصلاة، وعينه يجب عليه أن يصلي على حسب طاقته. So, starting with wa'in. Now we know we're starting out with a conditional phrase here. Oh, there's one thing I wanted to mention about last week's. My Najm and I were having a discussion about this, and we were talking about the signs, like how could a person know, for example, وَمَنْ تَرَكَ الصَّلَاةَ وَهُوَ بَالِغٌ عَاقِلٌ جَاهِدًا لَهَا أَوْ غَيْرُ جَاهِدٍ دُعِيَ. So it's, how would you know that coming off of this, these statements, it's starting a response to that statement, right? How would you know what is a sign that there's iltifat in the statement of the text, right? There's a switch, there's a shift from saying, okay, so describing the one who abandons the prayer, who neglects the prayer, describing their actions about that. Then there's a iltifat, there's a shift, a transition, and a switch in addressing the one who abandons the prayer to what is done with that person. So what is the best sign for this indication here? So من ترك الصلاة وهو بالغ عاقل جاهدا لها أو غير جاهد دعي إليها في وقت كل صلاة ثلاثة أيام. So this is one kind of statement, and then not a response to the statement, but a resulting action as a result of that statement, right? So what are our best signs, our best indicators for knowing that there's iltifat, for knowing that we're going from talking about man taraka salah and describing him and describing his abandoning the prayer to what is the response to that person, which is du'iya ilayha fi waqtin kulli salatin. How do we know that there's a shift to where we're going from one thing to the other? And Najm can't answer this because I gave her the answer on Sunday. Well, let's see if you remember. What was the... Anybody can answer. Go ahead, Najm. If you want to answer, go ahead. But how can you tell that there's iltifat? Well, how do you know? And it happens a couple of times here. Right. So what we have each time, notice, taraka, right? Taraka is the only verb here. The rest are nominal sentences. That's why we have predicates, right? So we've got tanwin with dhamma here. And then we've got the hal accusative, mansub al-hal, right? And then we've got ends with a prepositional phrase. But our only verb here is taraka. Then we have a switch in the voice. In this case, it's a switch in the voice of the verb. Okay? And we switch from a active voice, third person masculine singular, perfect tense, indicative mood, verb to a passive voice. So when there's a shift in voice in the verb, it's a good indication that you have iltifat. You have a switch in the conversation in some way, shape, or form. It's never the same switch. I mean, there's any number of different types of transitions there can be, or switches. It could be in the subjects, it can be in the implied subjects, it can be in the voice, right? Active or passive voice. There's any number of switches. Who's being addressed, in results of sentences. There's the iltifat can be in any number of different shifts or transitions. In this case, it's going from talking about the one who abandons the prayer, describing him and describing his abandonment of the prayer, to the shift is to what happens with this person, right? What should be done with them. دُعِيَ إِلَيْهَا فِي وَقْتِ كُلِّ صَلَاةٍ. Now it stops there, right? And then we start out with another sentence here. وَجُمْلَةُ ذَلِكَ أَنْ تَارِكَ صَلَاتِ لَا يَخْلُو, right? And then we talked about what لَا يَخْلُو means. And then it gives us a list. We know that after لَا يَخْلُو, a lot of times it would be a list of things, one, two, multiple things. And in this case, it's just two things, right? So it says, so in response to this list, right, it's going to go over, okay, it's either jahidan liwujubiha or gayri jahidin. So first dealing with the first on the list. فَإِنْ كَانَ جَاهِدًا لِوُجُوبِهَا نُذِرَ فِيهِ. Right, it's going to be looked into, his situation. فَإِنْ كَانَ جَاهِلًا بِهِ فَهُوَ مِمَّنْ يَجْهَلُ ذَلِكَ كَالْحَدِيثِ الْإِسْلَامِ وَالنَّاشِئَ بِبَادِيَةٍ. Then now what happens again? So here's the first in the list that's dealt with. So if he's jahidan, we look into it. If he's, and if he is, or if he was ignorant, all right, and then it gave examples of that. Now what happens again? We have a shift in the verb. It goes to passive tense. So we go from yajhalu, wa huwa mimman yajhalu. We have, well, first we start out with kana, then we have, right, so here's the first mini shift, right? فَإِنْ كَانَ جَاهِدًا what? لِوُجُوبِهَا نُذِرَ فِيهِ. So now we know in this sentence right here, we've got basically two sentences in this particular part. The first one starts فَإِنْ كَانَ جَاهِدًا. So kana is our first verb here. Then نُذِرَ tells us what's the result of that. There's the iltifat right there. It goes from third person masculine singular, active voice, indicative mood, right? Perfect tense. Then it goes to passive voice. So now we know there's an iltifat right here. Then فَإِنْ كَانَ جَاهِلًا بِهِ, right? So here's another kana. And then what happens? We go يَجْهَلُ ذَلِكَ. So if he was ignorant, and he is from among those who his ignorance in that is acceptable, giving us examples now. كَحَدِيثِ الْإِسْلَامُ نَاشِئَ بِبَادِيَةٍ. Now we have another shift here. عُرِفَ وُجُوبَهَا وَعُلِمَ ذَلِكَ. So here's the compound of the passive voice, and that's our other iltifat. That's another shift. And then we have another shift here. وَلَمْ يُحْكَمْ, right? It goes to yuhkam. Now we're dealing with the passive voice again, but this is present tense. Here we have past voice perfect tense. It switches to passive voice present tense. So now we have another shift. What happens with him? He is not judged, right? He's not judged with the kufr of the situation, right? The apparent kufr of it, of abandoning the prayer. He's not judged with it. لِأَنَّهُ مَعْذُورٌ, right? Because he is excused. So here you're seeing shifts back and forth. Third person masculine singular, active voice, perfect tense, indicative mood, going to passive voice. And there's shifts happening. And those shifts have to be reflected in the understanding, right? In the understanding in the translation. They're important shifts, and it's important to keep track of those, okay? So, moving on to the next line, we're here now. وَإِنْ لَمْ يَكُنْ مِمَّنْ يَجْهَلُ ذَلِكَ كَالنَّشِيءِ مِنَ الْمُسْلِمِينَ فِي أَمْصَارِ وَقُرَى لَمْ يُؤْذَرْ وَلَمْ يُقْبَلْ مِنْهُ إِدْعَاهُ الْجَهْلِ وَحُكِمَ بِكُفْرِهِ. Okay, So here's the first argument here. Where's our first shift? Just judging purely on the verbs. Where do you think our first shift is going to be? So our first verb we find is yakun, right? That's our first verb. Does yajhalu match yakun in tense and mood and voice? Yes, it does. So is there an iltifat here? Is there a shift here in who's being addressed or what's being addressed? No. If it's the same, we don't expect a shift. It's when it differs is when we expect a shift. So if the verb is keeping the same voice, tense, mood, etc., then we don't expect person, number, gender. No, it's staying the same, so we don't expect a shift. Where we expect a shift, let's look along. Right here we've got a clause that starts with a ka, so we're dealing with an example. Our first shift, now we go to lam yu'dhar. Right? We've got lam yu'dhar. Does yu'dhar match the tense, mood, voice of yakun and yajhalu? No. Now we're looking at something different here. So we've got lam yu'dhar wa lam yuqbal. These match, right? These match, except this is jussive and this is indicative, present tense. But they're both active voice present tense. But then it switches to it looks like I believe these might be passive. I believe these are passive voice. Okay. And then we've got another shift here. It goes from present tense passive voice to perfect tense passive voice. So we have another shift here. So we've got first shift from here to here is one shift. Sorry, to lam yu'dhar and yuqbal, and then from here to here is another shift. So we've got two shifts within this sentence. All right, that's what we want to keep track of. Now our first, it starts out with wa'in. Starts out with wa'in. Now we're dealing with a condition, right? Wa'in lam yakun mimman yajhalu dhalik ka, and then we've got an example of that. Lam, and then now here's the response of the condition, all the way up to here, and then here's the last shift, the third part of it. Okay, so let's start with this. Wa'in lam yakun. So if something is not, right? Who's the subject of lam yakun here? Third person masculine singular implied subject. So who's it referring to? Who's it referring back to, this implied subject? Who's the he here? The tariq, right? The tariq salah, right back here. The tariq salah, what's in red there. So if the tariq salat is not mimman yajhalu dhalik, is not from among those whose ignorance, right? Whose ignorance is accepted in that, meaning in his abandonment of the prayer, like kanashi min al-muslimin fil amsari wal qura. Now what does this mean here? Like, and then we covered over who is the nashi, right? Who's the nashi? The nashi is someone who was raised or someone who grew up, right? Min al-muslimina, so among the Muslims or from the Muslims. Fil amsari wal qura. So in the cities, the big cities, and Amsar is a big city, Qura is a small town, right? It's a small town. But a Qura is not so small of a town, you wouldn't call it a village. It's smaller than a city, but bigger than a village or a small town. It's a bigger town. And I'm sure there's exact criteria behind these, right? What exactly is a Qura and what is an Amsar? But here they're kind of being dealt with as synonyms. However, the Qura is from Qariya. It's the plural of Qariya. And the Amsar is the plural of Misr, right? Or Masr, Misr. So it's cities and towns. So what is it saying here? Right? It's saying that someone whose ignorance of the obligation of the prayer is not accepted from among those who grow up among the Muslims in the cities and towns. They don't have the excuse of the ignorance of this issue of the obligation of the prayer. Okay? He says, وَلَمْ يُؤْذَرْ. Right? So here's our first shift. Well, actually, it's a response to the condition, وَإِن لَمْ, right? وَإِن لَمْ. It starts here, the condition, and here's the response of the condition. So if this person is not from among those who are excused, and an example of those who are not excused is someone who grew up among the Muslims in the cities and towns, then he is not excused. وَلَمْ يُقْبَلْ مِنْهُ إِدْعَاهُ الْجَهْلِ. And his claim, إِدْعَاهُ, has a dhamma on it. So this is our subject of lam yuqbal, right? And idda'ahu jahli is the idafa, is the genitive construct. So it goes together. It's a subject. There's actually a genitive construct. So his claims of ignorance are not accepted from him. Lam yuqbal minhu, from him. This who is referring to the taraka salah. He is not excused, and his claims of ignorance are not accepted from him. وَحُكِمَ بِكُفْرِهِ. Now here's our last shift in these series of phrases. And he is judged with the kufr of that situation, with his kufr. Right? The determination is made of his disbelief, of his having disbelieved. Okay? لأن أدلة وجوب ظاهرات في كتاب والسنة. Because the evidences of the obligation, of the prayer, are ظاهرة. They're apparent, they're manifest in the book, the Quran, and the Sunnah. That's the main proof. Okay? This is the main proof for why a person who grows up among the Muslims in the cities and towns of Muslims is not excused, and their claims of ignorance are not accepted. And they're not from those people who are, their excuse of ignorance is taken. They're not from the people who are excused due to ignorance, because the evidences of the obligation of the prayer are evident. They're self-evident in the Quran and the Sunnah. And how can a person avoid reading and knowing the Quran and Sunnah in a Muslim society, in a Muslim city? How could they avoid seeing Islam being practiced, the Sharia being implemented in a Muslim city and town? It's inconceivable to Ibn Qudamah and to most of the other scholars of his time that you would have a quote-unquote Muslim city and that the Sharia is not being implemented there, that the book and the Sunnah are not known, that they don't have people of knowledge. وَالْمُسْلِمُونَ يَفْعَلُونَهَا عَلَى الدَّوَامِ. And the Muslims are doing it, meaning performing the prayer perpetually, على دوام, consistently. Right? 5 times a day. People are closing the shops, people are leaving off what they're doing, they're leaving their homes, washing up, making wudu, heading to the masjid and praying. So how can you not, right, in a society that the prayer is being established as an obligation and you have no choice but to pray it, and if you refuse to pray it, right, you're told, we will kill you if you don't pray it. You will be put to death for abandoning the prayer intentionally without an excuse. So if you live in a place like this, how can you not know it's an obligation? You're like 10 years ago, there was somebody who was refused to pray and they were told, and then they got up and prayed. You remember things like that, right? And it's impossible to not see people closing up shops and going to pray 5 times a day. It's impossible to grow up in such an area and not know that you have to pray. It's an obligation. فَلَا يَخْفَى وُجُوبُهَا. So فَلَا يَخْفَى. So its obligation, right? We've got our dhamma here on wujubuha. So its obligation, la yakhfa, is not concealed. It's not hidden. Ala man hadha haluhu. on, it's not hidden from. We would say yakhfa a'la would go together, right? This a'la goes with yakhfa. And if you need proof of this, what do we like to do? We can look up this. Akhfa. No, it's not bringing ala with it, but I believe it does go with this verb, this ala. So its obligation is not concealed from, even though it says ala, we would say from man hadha halahu, from he who haluhu, right? This is the subject now of this clause because of the dhamma, of he who his circumstance is thus, hadha. Or from he who this is his circumstance, but that's not matching the grammar here. Is not hidden from someone whose circumstance is thus. فلا يجحدها إلا تكذيبا لله تعالى. And a person, right, a hypothetical person, right, or someone in whose circumstances are thus, who grew up in Muslim lands, who've been exposed to the Quran and the Sunnah, who witnessed the Muslims performing the prayer consistently, daily, multiple times a day, they would not فلا يجحدها, they would not deny it, they would not oppose it and deny it, إلا تكذيبا, except تكذيبا. Now, why this has fatha tanween, this تكذيبا? It comes after illa, the exception, right? But why is this fatha tanween? It could just be fatha coming after illa. But why is it fatha tanween? It is nakira, but why? Why is it it's indefinite, doesn't have definite article, that's why we have tanween, but there's another reason too. There's another reason for it. Right? So it does have fatha tanween because it's indefinite or nakira. However, it's also applying another rule to it as well. What is it? It's mansub al-hal, right? It's describing the jahada. It's describing the jahada, right? They would not deny it except in takdiban, well, jahada, we'd have to come up with two different terms for this. Typically, takdib is denial, right? So jahada, we'd have to pick a different word for that. I would say oppose it. They would not oppose the prayer, meaning they would not oppose the prayer, except in denial of Allah, even though it says lillahi, because it's hal, and hal is always listen. This word takdiban is modifying yajhadu. It's modifying yajhadu. It would be tanween fatha even if it was just an object. But in this case, it comes after the exception, and it is nakira. That's why it's tanween fatha. But also because it's a hal al-mansub al-hal for yajhadu. It's modifying the way that it's being opposed, the prayer. So he's describing the opposition to the prayer. It's in denial of Allah Ta'ala and wali rasulihi, and his messenger, wa ijma'il ummah, and the consensus of the ummah, right? So this a person in this circumstance of living among the Muslims, the Quran and Sunnah being manifest, the obligation, right, being manifest in the Quran and Sunnah, watching the Muslims perform the salat multiple times a day, right? The obligation of prayer wouldn't be concealed from such a person in this circumstance, right? And so their opposition to it could not be except in denial of Allah and His Messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the consensus of the ummah. وَهَذَا يَصِيرُ مُرْتَادًا عَنَ الْإِسْلَامِ. And this person, right, in this circumstance, yasiru, he would become murtadan, a murtad, right? In this case, murtadan, this tanwin fatha is because it's nakira and because it's the object. It's not a mansub al-hal. This takdiban is both a nakira, but it's not the object of yajhaduha. It's not an object. It's a mansub al-hal. This murtadan is an object and it's nakira. That's why it has tanwin fatha. Okay, does that make sense? Is an apostate. This one will become an apostate from Islam. Wa hukmuhu, and his hukm, his legal ruling, hukmu sa'iril murtadin, is the same hukm as the legal ruling as the rest of the apostates. Fi istitabati wa qatli, in regards to seeking repentance from him and killing. Wala a'lamu fi hadha al-khilafa, and I do not know. This is who's this I here? Wala a'lamu, who's I? Ibn Qudamah, that's right. So, and I do not know fi hadha, in this issue, this what I just described, I do not know any difference of opinion in this. وَإِن تَرَاكَهَا لِمَرَدٍ أَوْ عَجْزٍ عَنْ أَرْكَانِهَا وَشُرُوطِهَا قِيلَ لَهُ. So if a person, if he abandons it, meaning the prayer, لِمَرَدٍ, due to a sickness, أَوْ عَجْزٍ, or inability to perform, عَنْ أَرْكَانِهَا, to perform its rukun, its pillars, وَشُرُوطِهَا, and its stipulated, its stipulations, meaning the prayer stipulations, the pillars of the prayer, and what's stipulated for the prayer. Now I use the word stipulation for sharta, and stipulations plural for shuruti, instead of conditions, because I use the word condition for ahwal or for hal, right? In English, you could say conditions for a contract, right? You can say condition can be used to describe a lot of things in English. It can be referred to as a hal, or a state of things. A condition can be something that's predicated on something else, like this won't happen unless this. But because the word condition has so many different meanings in English, the word stipulation is only one meaning. That's why I use stipulation for shart. I don't use condition. I use condition for hal. Sometimes I use circumstance for hal as well. But for shurut, I use stipulation. Now, something that's stipulated means that it's not valid without fulfilling that one thing, right? So when something is stipulated, it means that that's a condition for the fulfillment of the whole thing. So the pillars and the stipulations of the prayer. So if somebody abandons it due to sickness or an inability to perform the pillars and the stipulations of the prayer, it is said to him, "Inna dhalika la yuskitu salata." It is told to him that indeed that, meaning the performance of the prayer, or your inability to pray and your sickness, your inability to perform the pillars and the stipulations of the prayer, and your your sickness, la yuskutu as-salat. That does not drop the obligation of the prayer from you. وَعَيْنُهُ يَجِبُ عَلَيْهِ أَنْ يُصَلِّيَ عَلَى حَسَبِ. What's this who referring to, and why is this third person masculine singular for this present tense active verb yajibu? Okay, this alayhi is the person we're talking about hypothetically. But what is this who right here? And why is that who? What is it referring to, which is the subject of yajibu? Anybody? No, if it was salat, it would be feminine singular, right? If it was salat, it would be feminine singular, the subject. It would be tajibu. No, not the illness. Whatever comes after an is the subject of yajibu, and it's who is referring to. Okay, this is a tough one. But here, we're going to find out right here. Okay, no. Whatever comes after an here is the subject of, who is referring to for inahu and yajibu. وَعِينَهُ يَجِبُ عَلَيْهِ أَنْ يُصَالِيَ عَلَى حَسَبِ طَاقَاتِهِ. Right, طَاقَاتِهِ. That's what is yusalliya ala hasabi taqatihi is the subject of yajibu. That's what's obligatory for him. So what is obligatory for him? To pray in accordance, in proportion to his capacity or ability. وإن تركها تهونا أو كسلا دعي إلى فعلها وقيل له إن صليت وإلا قتلناك فإن صال وإلا وجب قتله ولا يقتل حتى يحبس ثلاثا ويضيق عليه فيها ويدعى في الوقت كل صلاة إلى فعلها ويخوف بالقتل فإن صال وإلا قتل بالسيف. So here it's saying that if a person abandons it, meaning the prayer, tahawunan, what this means, tahawunan, out of negligence, out of carelessness, tahawuna. This fatha tanween is what? Why does it have fatha tanween here? Yes, it's nakira, but there's another factor that's determining it. Right? This is not an object of tarakaha. Ha is the object. It's the object in the form of a damir, of a pronoun. It's the same thing of takdiban. I was going to say arriba. I was going to use Spanish. Subhanallah. Sometimes when I'm thinking, I think in Spanish, especially with Arabic. I don't think when I can't think of a word, it comes out Spanish instead of English. Like up here, takdiban. This had takdiban. It has yajhaduha. It has its object as a pronoun suffix, and even it comes after illa. But this takdiban is modifying the verb. So if we have something that's modifying the verb, telling us how a verb is being done, then it's telling us it's mansub al-hal, right? So if a person abandons it, meaning the prayer tahawunan, out of carelessness or neglect, aw kasalan. What's kasalan? Idleness, laziness, right? So we have out of carelessness and laziness. So if we have someone who abandons the prayer out of laziness or carelessness, heedlessness, you could say, they forgot about it, it passed them by the time they forgot about it, or kasalan, out of laziness, they just delayed it from being lazy until it passed. Du'ya ila al-fi'liha. Right? Here's our now what did I say about the iltifat? We have taraka here, which is third person, which is active voice, perfect tense, right? Maldi, indicative mood, third person masculine singular, and then when we come to du'iya, we get to our active voice, perfect tense, third person masculine singular. We know there's iltifat going on. So now we know that what's being addressed switches. There's iltifat. There's a shift in what's being treated. So now we know that this is the response to the wa'in. This is the response. So if a person neglects the prayer out of heedlessness, carelessness, or laziness, he is called to its performance or to performing it. Illa fi'lihi. He is called to perform it, to do it, meaning the prayer. وَقِيلَ لَهُ, and it said to him, in salayta. And what do we say about this? He goes to wa'illa right away. It says if you pray, otherwise, but in English, what are we missing? We're missing the my man's got no shirt on. We're missing the in salayta. If you pray, then what? Otherwise, qatalnak. We will kill you. So this is not when you're knocking on doors, inviting people to the mosque, the masjid to pray, and they I got a thing this. Well, if you don't come, we'll kill you. That's not what this is proposing, right? This it is said to him is left passive voice. This should be the authorities. This should be the somebody that's been given the wilaya, the authority to look over the affairs of the people, right? There's not just some random person saying, telling this to people, going around telling people this. Muslims in a Muslim city or Muslims in Dar al-Kufr, either. But this in salata, there's no response to this. Fa what? So then what? But it's implied. If you pray, good. We'll leave you alone. Wa illa, if otherwise, qaltalnak, we will kill you for abandoning the prayer. This is what you have to understand. There's something implied between the end of this and the wa illa, right? If you pray, good and fine. Wa illa qatalnak, we will kill you. Fa'in sala, so if he prays, again, same thing. If he prays, then good and fine. Wa illa, otherwise, wajiba qatluhu. His killing is obligatory. ولا يقتل حتى يحبس ثلاثة. And ولا يقتل, active or passive voice. Anybody? Passive, that's right. So he is not killed حتى, until يحبس ثلاثة, until he and another passive voice, right? So these verbs match up except for the jasaf part, right? This is mansub. This is actually this should be ولا يقتل. I don't know if it should be يقتل. Not sure why it's not jazm if it's coming after the la. Allahu alam. But he is not killed until he is imprisoned for three what? For 3 days. That's right. Even though it doesn't say ayamin, it's 3 days. وَيُضَيَّكَ عَلَيْهِ فِيهَا وَيُضَيَّكَ عَلَيْهِ فِيهَا. What this means, another passive, right? So we're not making any iltifa here, right? It keeps giving us the same, aside from coming after the negative particle and being jessive, and this being possibly subjunctive because of the hata. Here we have it following the wa. This has to do with what's happening with this person still. وَيُضَيَّكَ. And why it doesn't say وَيُضَيَّكُ? Because I believe that's still having the effect of this particle as well. Subjunctive mood, having the fatha on the end. Allahu alam. But وَيُضَيَّكَ عَلَيْهِ فِيهَا. ضَيَّقَ means to what? To make narrow, right? To make something narrow. We'll finish up quick here. We'll finish up shortly. To confine. يُضَيَّقَ عَلَيْهِ. This ضَيَّقَ up here doesn't have a preposition after it. It just says جَعَلَهُ ضَيَّقًا. Excuse me. This one down here is ضَيَّقَ عَلَى. So we want to take this definition. So it means to exert pressure on. وَيُضَيَّقَ عَلَيْهِ فِيهَا. So pressure is exerted on him. This he is referring to, this alayhi, this he here, is referring to the one who is not killed and who's in prison for 3 days, right? And this ha is referring to what? The prayer, that's right. So pressure is exerted on him, That's how we make it passive. Pressure is exerted upon him or on him regarding the prayer. Yeah, they're pushing it. It's not just throw him in jail and then if he just doesn't decide to pray on his if he doesn't get up and pray in any of those 3 days, then he's killed. No, you're constantly pressuring him, pressuring. Pray. How? وَيُدْعَى فِي وَقْتِ كُلٍّ صَلَاةٍ إِلَى الْفِعْلِهَا. He is called in the time of each prayer to perform it, to do the prayer. وَيُخَوَّفَ بِقَتْلِ. And he's threatened. He's made to be afraid with the killing. He's threatened with the killing. فَعِنْ صَالَ. If he prays, fine and good. وَإِلَّا قُتِلَ بِسَيْفٍ. He is killed with a sword. And now here's another refutation in the books of fiqh. The ahkam will give you the proper perspective, right, of everything. Nowadays, you kill anything with a knife or a sword and they're like, oh, it's barbaric, like as people are doing slaughters by cutting the neck and letting the blood drain out. SubhanAllah, that is the most humane, not even humane. That's the way that Allah has told us is the best way to kill anything, human or animal. Okay? The best, Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, he mentions this in his book. He says that Allah has commanded with the best in all the actions. Okay? And so when it comes to slaughter, the best way to slaughter is cutting the neck with a sharp knife, doing it according, having the body facing the east or facing the Qibla and saying Bismillah and doing all the requisites of the dabiha. But killing a human being is the same. It should be done, if you unless it's going to be an exemplary punishment, which is legislated in some cases, like people spreading fasad in the land, etc. Then it should be with the sword. وَإِلَّا قُتِلَ بِسَيْفٍ. This is part of the hukam, right? Should be killed with a sword. Otherwise, he is killed with the sword. وَبِهَذَا قَالَ Malik, and who adopted this? Malik adopted this. Hamad ibn Zayd adopted it. Waqi' adopted it. Shafi'i adopted it as well. وقال الزهري يضرب ويسجن. Az-Zuhri said he should be struck, he should be hit and imprisoned. وَبِهِ قَالَ Abu Hanifa. Abu Hanifa said the same thing. He should be يضرب, he should be hit, ويسجن, and he should be imprisoned. ولا يقتل, and he shouldn't be killed. لأن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قال لا يحل ثلاثين كفر بعد إيمان أو زنا بعد إحسان أو قتل نفس بغير حق متفق عليه. So agreed upon by all the scholars. It is not permissible. The blood of an individual, of a Muslim individual, of a Muslim man, is not permissible except by one of three things: either kufr after iman, or fornication after having been married, or the killing of a person without right. Muttafaqun alayh. But now he's going to go into the arguments, right? But we got the hukam. We have the hukam. Now he's going to go into the evidences for the counter argument, which is of Abu Hanifa and Az-Zuhri. He's going to give their perspective and their view on it, and the way they look at it. And then he's going to come back to usually what happens. He'll say walana or something like this. Here it is, walana. See right there? You see where he says right here, walana, qawlullahi ta'ala. Once Ibn Qudamah starts saying walana, that's it. He starts going into the Hanbali position, right? But before this, from here up to where he mentions this, وَقَالَ الزُّهْرِيُّ يُضْرَبُ وَيُسْجَنُ. From there to walana is the argument of Abu Hanifa and Az-Zuhri, rahimahumma Allahu. طيب, we'll stop there inshallah. Jazakumullahu khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
كفاني علم ربي من سؤالي واختياري فدعائي وابتهالي شاهد لي بافتقاري قد كفاني علم ربي من سؤالي واختياري فدعائي وابتهالي شاهد لي بافتقاري فلهذا السر أدعو في يساري وعساري أنا عبد صار فخري ضمن فقري واضطراري قد كفاني علم ربي من سؤالي واختياري فدعائي وابتهالي شاهد لي بافتقاري